Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast. Hosted by Selena Gervais, Program Manager of the Energy Engagement, Leadership, and Career Center at the School of Energy Resources. The show highlights SER's role in supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development in the state of Wyoming.
Welcome back to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast where we explore the innovation, leadership, and science driving Wyoming's energy future. I'm your guest host, Selena Gervais, filling in for host Aaron Phillips, and today we are zooming out to look at the global energy landscape through a Wyoming lens. Our guest today is uniquely positioned to help us do just that. Dr. Brian Horn is a seasoned geoscientist with over 30 years of experience spanning the world's major energy basins, from the North Sea to the Gulf of Mexico. Currently, he serves as the managing director of Hatteras Energy Group, where he focuses on the strategic development of subsurface assets. But he joins us today in another vital capacity as the 2025-2026 president of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, AAPG. Brian has been a vocal advocate for what he calls the energy transition in transition, a move towards a more rational, science-based dialogue about how we balance reliability, cost, and environmental stewardship. Today, we're going to discuss his vision for the future of the geoscience workforce and why Wyoming's unique geology remains the essential foundation for the next generation of energy solutions. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Selena. It's an honor to be here.
All right. So I'd like to start by learning a little bit more about your background and how you got to where you are today. Could you please give our listeners a brief overview of your career journey and a bit about yourself?
That's a lot. I'll try to make it short. Okay. It's funny. I went to university first to play soccer, believe it or not. I went on scholarship to a small little college in Kansas called Benedictine College. That was in the delusional days where I wanted to be a professional soccer player, and but it was fun. And I had an injury, and that was, I remember that one night realizing I needed to probably get a life and figure out what I was going to do for the rest of it as opposed to playing soccer. And so I left and came to the University of Colorado. I grew up in Denver, and it seemed like the logical place to attend school. And I had to take a course in geology, of all things. Everybody has to take, rocks for jocks, so to speak, that intro course. And I really liked it. And I remember talking to my older brother, and he said, well, look, this is what school is about. You want to try to find the things that you enjoy. And so I really enjoyed geology. And at that point, I decided, okay, I was going to be a geology major as an undergraduate, not really understanding what part of geology I was going to go into or anything like that. And then as fate would have it, I was playing on a intramural or a summer leaguer down in Denver, and one of the teammates worked as a geologist for a company called Amerada Hess. It was now known as Hess. But he said, hey, would you like to take a summer job? And I was a second year at university, and I went to work as a geotech there and started working in the Williston Basin, of all places. That's where I learned North Dakota. And I really enjoyed it. And at that moment, I was hooked. That was what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a petroleum geologist. But what was interesting was I had the good fortune of being mentored by a very good friend of mine who, he said to me, Brian, you can't be exclusively a geologist if you're going to be in the energy business. You need to understand geophysics. You need to understand petroleum engineering. You need to understand petrophysics. You need to understand commercial analysis, because all these things go together. And it's an interesting comment that was made by a past president of AAPG, a gentleman by the name of Marlon Downey. And his comment was, geology is a science, but exploration is a business. Mm. And so that is really what this is about at the end of the day. And the energy landscape that we find ourselves in is a business. We need to have a net positive gain for society, both from a environmental, but also from a commercial standpoint as well. And how we go about doing that is, a big part of the discussion that's happening now with regard to the energy transition is a lot of people have started to do the math and go, well, wait a minute. The demands for energy and what we're saying we're going to supply that with, the equation doesn't balance.
Yeah, that's a good insight about recognizing the economics and how important the economics are.
So anyway, going back to my career path, so I finished and went to work for Diamond Shamrock in Amarillo, Texas. I was there a few years and then decided to pursue a master's degree. So I went back to the University of Colorado and did my master's. And then when I finished there, I went to work for actually a mechanical engineering firm, believe it or not. It was 1989. There weren't a lot of jobs, and I needed to work. And it was a great experience because one of the things I learned in my career path is just because it may not be exactly what you want to be doing at the time doesn't mean that it doesn't have value for your career going forward. So I spent 3 years in the heavy machinery and manufacturing sector teaching a course in precision alignment of rotating equipment. So I went to pulp and paper mills, oil refineries, power plants, and spent a lot of time, and I was teaching a course to the millwrights, the mechanics, about how to work smarter. And I did that for about 3 years, and I remember thinking I didn't know if I was ever going to get back into geology. But one of the takeaways was that I really learned how to stand up and give a presentation in front of people because I was doing it about every other week in people I didn't know for a 5-day course. All over, it was pretty much all over the U.S., but some international as well. And then I got a phone call one day from a friend of mine who was a professor at the Colorado School of Mines, and he said, "Brian, have you ever thought about doing a PhD?" And of course, my immediate answer was, well, no. Actually, John, I haven't thought about it at all. He said, well, you should do that. So I dipped my toe in the water and took a couple courses. And then I decided to just jump in with both feet. And it was the best decision I ever made. My experience at School of Mines, not only in the School of Geology, but also you have to declare a minor. And so I did a minor in petroleum engineering, which at that time, the petroleum engineering department was outstanding. It still is. But I learned one of the things I took away from that was doing the petroleum engineering made me a much better geologist. It made me think more integrated. And so for a while, I taught the petroleum engineering geology field camp. So at School of Mines, they actually have a 3-week field camp that all petroleum engineers have to do to go out in the field and do geologic work. Mm. And it was interesting because I was able to have the conversation with them because I had taken all the same classes that they had had. And they were, why do I need to do this? I don't need to draw this structural cross-section. This makes no sense to me. Or what does this matter? And then you would put it in engineering terms and you would say, look at an outcrop and say, okay, draw a capillary pressure curve across that boundary that you're looking at. What does that tell you? What does that do with fluid flow? What's going to happen? And it was at that point then they would go, oh, okay, now I understand, and as most engineers will admit, the rocks do matter when we talk about the field. When we talk about anything, whether it's groundwater, whether it's petroleum, whether it's carbon sequestration, hydrogen, it doesn't matter. The characterization of the subsurface is critical to being successful in having those projects work. So I finished I had a really good fortune actually of getting a summer internship at Amoco in Denver. And at the end of that internship, my boss came to me and she said, well, how would you like to just keep working for us? And I wasn't even a year and a half into my PhD. And I said, yeah, that's great. And so only by the grace of God, really, I'd say that Amoco funded my whole PhD. I worked full time and got out. And then when I finished, I went to work straight for that asset team. So I was working embedded in a oil and gas company from the time I started graduate school, which was very fortunate. I was happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Thank you. It's helpful for all of us, but I think especially for young people and our students that might be listening to hear people's stories of how they get to where they are and how all the different experiences add up to something, even if it doesn't feel like a straight line getting there.
Well, it's never a straight line. And the other thing, I was down at the University of Texas and talking to the students there, and I said, if you would have handed me a piece of paper 30 years ago and gave me a pen and said, okay, Brian, write down your career, the places you're going to go, the people you're going to meet, the things you're going to do, the things you're going to see, how much you're going to get paid. I never would have had the creativity to write it as well as it's turned out. I can't even imagine that. I could have never thought of all those things. It would have been impossible.
That's kind of a lovely insight there, that you couldn't have written it as good as it turned out.
Never.
And we should all be able to say that about our lives. So
Absolutely.
That's lovely. As you mentioned, you attended both the Colorado School of Mines and the University of Colorado Boulder. So you have a unique local perspective on this region. How did the geology of the Rocky Mountain region shape your early approach to subsurface exploration and reservoir characterization?
Well, okay, so having grown up in Denver, I remember my dad telling me, he goes, well, there's this new ski area we're going to go to. It's called Vail. I don't know if we're going to check it out. But your grandfather has a ranch in Gypsum we're going to go stay at, and then we'll go to Vail. So I got it. My love for the mountains was based on skiing primarily initially.
Yes.
But I was always fascinated by it. But I also think that when I found geology, when you are in the Front Range, you have pretty much the Paleozoic all the way through the Upper Cretaceous section exposed. And you see it every day. It doesn't matter if you're driving up 285, if you're driving up Highway 93. When I came up here across 287, you drive right up Owl Canyon. That whole section is there.
Yeah.
I think seeing that all the time was like, because I used to go, when I was in high school, we would go to concerts at Red Rocks, right? And it was, the Fountain Formation is beautiful, and I was always you're just surrounded by that all the time. And so that's probably what got me started. I actually, as an undergraduate, what I liked the most was just going out on the camping trips and the field trips. I mean, I'm like, okay, I'm studying here. This is great. Like being outside, right? But the challenge also too with being in the field is that the only knowledge you can really take with you is what's between your ears. You don't carry a book out into the field other than a notebook. But I learned, actually this was in graduate school because, in all honesty, I was completely unprepared for college when I got there. I mean,
weren't we all?
Completely unprepared. But nonetheless, being around other people and then listening to the things that they would talk about and the observations that they made, the power of observation. And that was what really has changed for me in my career is we're very quick to interpret, but very reticent to describe. And the fundamentals of geoscience is description. It's not interpretation at all. And I remember my sedimentology professor, a guy by the name of Pete McCabe, who was at the USGS. I think he's in Australia now. But anyway, he was very much a stickler to learn how to marshal your argument. Learn how to make the observations that don't have any interpretive language in them at all. And then once you've done that, you state the 4 or 5 or 6 observations that you've made. And then you say, because of that, I interpret it as this, which is a very different thing. And also, too, when you go out into the field, that you teach that as well. And you're like, okay, I used to teach a field course when I worked at British Petroleum. And we would go out to, the Rock Springs Uplift is where it was. And we would look at the Erickson and the Almond Formation. And there's some beautiful outcrops on the north, I guess it'd be the northeast corner of the Rock Springs Uplift. And we'd hand out these photo mosaics, and we would go to the other side of the canyon, and then we would say, okay, draw what you see, right? And so we would have people draw. There's the contact between the Erickson and the Almond is very sharp. The Erickson is very thick, high net to gross, coarse-grained sandstones, and the Almond is mostly mudstone with interbedded sandstones and lenticular it's clearly onset of a tidal environment because you see oyster beds and things like that interbedded through the section. But from, a quarter of a mile away with binoculars, you're not going to see that. You're just going to see the geometry of that. And so then we began to say, okay, now we would have everybody stand up and say, what are your observations? And we used to take one of these little buzzers, right? And we would say the only rule of this part of the exercise is you cannot use an interpretive word. And so, of course, the first thing people say is, I see these channel sandstones. And, no, because that's an interpretation. As opposed, describe what you're seeing. I'm seeing a lenticular sand body that pinches out to the right, and it's approximately 100 meters wide and 10 meters thick, or something like that, right? I mean, that was really what we were trying to instill in the course, was to try to say, remember, try to describe first. It's easy to do the interpretation, but if you just jump to the interpretation, you really haven't looked at the rocks. So anyway, that was a real eye opener for me in graduate school. And then also too, when I was at Golden, I was surrounded by some of the smartest people I had ever met. I was just blown away. And I realized that there was a group called the Genetic Stratigraphy Group, which was run by a gentleman by the name of Tim Cross. And it was astounding, some of the work that they were doing. And I was just completely captivated by that. And I knew that he was not my primary advisor, but I knew that I needed to be around those people. And some of those people are still my best friends to today. It was great. So anyway.
That description of the difference between observation and interpretation, I think that's a really valuable insight, and probably is something you've been able to apply to a lot of different parts of your life. I think that's an important distinction. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about your professional experience, especially as it relates to Wyoming. You've spent a career looking at basins from the North Sea to the Gulf of Mexico. So when you look at the Greater Green River Basin or the Powder River Basin through that global lens that you've gotten perspective on, what makes our resources unique compared to other places?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough. I did my master's thesis on the muddy sandstone in the Powder River Basin. Okay, so I looked at a lot of those fields, and that was when I was working for Diamond Shamrock at the time. And then when I went to work for Amoco, after working southeastern Oklahoma, I came and worked the Green River Basin. And I worked the Greater Green for about 5 years. And of course, that was all centered around Wamsutter primarily. There was Jonah Field that had just been discovered recently. And then, obviously, the Moxa Arch, which is to the west. And then, out around the Fold and Thrust Belt, obviously, in Kemmerer and all those areas were big assets. Anschutz Ranch was one of those things, And these were all legacy things that Champlin had gotten into. I'm not sure how Amoco had picked those up, but they were part of that, which ultimately became the land grant that Union Pacific picked up, right? Which is an amazing, the value of that the government gave the Union Pacific Railroad is astounding. I think it's 80 miles on either side of I-80, right? Every other section, the mineral wealth of that it probably changed Wyoming, right? And it was fortunate enough because there's a lot of natural gas, primarily. The Green is primarily a gas basin. There's some oil, but mostly the gas. And so we were working in a basin that was, I guess from a global perspective, the Rockies are very different. But one of the things I did learn having the opportunity to work the Rockies is if you can work the Rocky Mountain basins and work all of them, it prepares you to work just about any other basin in the world, honestly. Because you have a lacustrine basin, the Green River Basin, you've got Fold and Thrust Belt, you've got intermontane basins, the winds, the powder, all those things. And it's primarily driven by the Cretaceous interior seaway and the Cretaceous section, right? But that is an amazing time in the world where then you can go back to, say, the Tethys, which is in Europe and those areas, or you can go to what we see now in the Permian, right? That was that's an older basin, the Tabusa Basin, I believe that was called. And now what we started doing is we started looking at all these margins, because while these onshore basins are very productive, and that was sort of the testing ground for a lot of ideas. What we're finding now is the large, billion-barrel discoveries, and this is the exception of the Permian, so I'll just make that caveat there, have all been offshore, right, in the deep water, okay, with these continental margins. And we used to joke about the Gulf of Mexico. I worked the Gulf of Mexico for a long time, and I used to say, I gave a talk one time at the Gulf Coast section, and my talk was, I was asked to, when I worked for a company called Ion Geophysical, and we were doing regional 2D seismic acquisition. And I was asked to present to the CEO, why are we doing the Gulf of Mexico? And I told him, I said, and I gave this at the talk, I said, I only have 3 points for my talk. My first point is all roads lead to the Gulf of Mexico. And my second point is all roads lead to the Gulf of Mexico. And my final point was, as you can guess, all roads lead to the Gulf of Mexico. Because for the offshore world, all the testing ground and all these salt basins and things like that were tested, and that is where industry has learned tremendous over the last 60, 70 years. Okay. But that came from all the onshore stuff that we learned about reservoirs and the shallow marine, say in the teapot or the frontier or the muddy. And so then once we found out, oh, well, wait a minute, what we thought was a source rock now is a reservoir, okay? So now we're drilling in the Mowry and the Niobrara, right? In the DJ Basin, for example. I have a bit of kind of family heritage from the DJ Basin, only in the sense that my great-grandfather homesteaded in Platteville back in, I think, 1901 or something like that, right? And that farm is still there. And anyway, but, having been around all that, when I was at CU, in Geology 101, you go out to the 6 Mile Fold and you look at the folded Niobrara, right? Well, now that was just a thinly bedded argillaceous limestone. Well, now it's a reservoir rock producing, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, if not millions, out of the DJ Basin. They're pursuing it also in the because of the Cretaceous interior seaway was so vast. Before all these basins formed, they were like one basin, right? And so that's why the stratigraphy is very similar in a lot of these Rocky Mountain basins. There are differences, clearly, and the problem is that they have different names, right? But that's then where the U.S. Geological Survey came in, and they started doing all this time dating with, ammonites and all this stuff in the Cretaceous, which is a cephalopod, basically. And they were able to say, oh, wait, this is the same rock. It's all the same. And so that's why all these plays now are starting to expand. Now, the Powder is the one that's kind of still emerging, I think. But that's more of a commercial issue, in my view, as opposed to a resource potential, okay? In the DJ Basin in Colorado, that's got some regulatory issues. The Greater Green is still producing a lot of gas. I don't believe Amoco owns that much more, and Jonah Field. So then the question will be, well, then actually, so north of Jonah Field is what's known as the Pinedale Anticline. And that was another area that when I was working in Wyoming hadn't been tested yet. I mean, it was a completely new area. Well, now the Pinedale Anticline is, I think Ultra came in there, and I don't know how many, maybe thousands of wells that have been drilled on the Pinedale Anticline. Yeah. But what was interesting about that was I had a long conversation with a woman that I know very well, who I worked with at Amoco. Her name is Diana Hoff, and she worked for I think it was either Tom Brown, at the time. And, she told me the preparation to go in to actually drill those wells. She said that they were 3 years. They were planning wells 3 years in advance. 3 years. Because of all of, you've got elk bugling season, you've got sage grouse nesting. There are certain periods of the year where they couldn't move a rig. Once the rig was there, it had to be there for 3 months. Right? And so and then they had to bury all the water lines and do all that preparation out ahead. And then the interesting thing about it was in Pinedale, they went in and had all these community meetings every month. This is what's happening. This is where we're going. This is what we're doing. And they had a very, very good operation that went very smooth. And so that's part of the social engagement of this. Yeah. It's critical, right? One of the greatest things about the United States is that we have individual mineral ownership. Most countries in the world do not. And that is a disincentive. And this is why we have such an energy-rich economy, because of that commerce. So going back to answer your question, that was a very long-winded answer to, global understanding. I think what it is for me is I was trained in the Rockies, and I use more of my knowledge of the Rockies when I go into new basins internationally than new international basins coming here, because of the wealth of outcrop as well, right? All the work that was done by the U.S. Geological Survey, and all the universities, Wyoming, like Ron Surdam was a professor here for years, Jim Steitman, Rondi Martinson. They did all this work in all these areas, which one trained a bunch of geology students, right? But also then published all these papers that began to talk about, basin-centered gas accumulations, which was what we call the unconventional tight gas now, but that was the original name for it, right? How does a basin-centered gas happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so that sparked a whole lot of industry activity, but also research from the academic perspective that led to basically understanding how all these basins formed. And now having done that, and those were based on field observations primarily, not so much seismic or anything like that, but then the industry activity then provided the subsurface data set to really make the correlations more robust.
Thanks for those perspectives on Wyoming basins and Wyoming geology, as well as for bringing up the importance of that community engagement piece, which is important to me as a social scientist. With your background in petroleum systems and strategic correlations, how do you view Wyoming's geology as a competitive advantage for emerging technologies like carbon capture and storage or hydrogen?
Right. Well, it seems, and this is my perception. It's funny. I have a friend. I'll plug her podcast. It's called the Petronerds podcast. Her name is Trisha Curtis. Petronerds.
Petronerds. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm gonna
but anyway, Trisha is from Wyoming. That's just why I'm bringing this up. Mm-hmm. Okay. And she's in Denver now. And I always joke with her. She's from Wyoming and work in Denver. And I said, I'm from Denver, and I wish I lived in Wyoming. Right. But no, it's this is a place you fall in love with. Right, as we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
And I think that for me, but Wyoming also has a cultural history of energy and a cultural history of stewardship of the land, all right, from the ranchers and all the exploration that's gone on, but also the mining business as well. I mean, obviously, Wyoming has some of the largest coal mines in the world, I think, or some pretty big ones, yes. And then, so what's interesting about that is that it's uniquely positioned to embrace those technologies. I mean, let's be honest, carbon capture is nothing new, but it's certainly still an emerging technology. There are very few people making money, as we go back to geology as a science, exploration as a business comment, using carbon capture, all right? So what is the incentive? There can be a debate about should the public funds and the government pay for this to get it going. Okay, subsidies are one way to do it. Tax credits are another way to do it. I'm not really an expert on those things, with regard to social policy or public policy. But those are some of the levers that get used, and then after a while, we find that these things don't work. With regard to hydrogen, it's interesting, whether it's blue hydrogen or green hydrogen or what kind of hydrogen it is. Hydrogen, from a scientific perspective, is a really small molecule.
Yes.
So, we think we understand the subsurface, but, that is, and I'm not, again, I've reached my technical limit on the hydrogen world, right? But that would be my first thought. If somebody was asking me about it, I was like, wow, that's going to be a tough thing to do. Finding, I guess it'd be white hydrogen. It's the cleanest form, right? I think is where you find it organically stored, right? So I think there's a few things, white, green, blue, or something like that.
Whole spectrum.
Yeah, the spectrum. Yeah, exactly. So, that's challenging. It's something that should be obviously looked at, right? And so this is where industry, in my opinion, has sort of been involved and then pulled back. And, in the days of today where budgets at schools are challenged, the same thing can be said for budgets in corporations. And in the corporate world, you run quarter to quarter. Well, that's every 3 months. That makes it very difficult to have a long-term plan. And for something like hydrogen, you got to have a long-term plan. It's got to be if it were me and I was given the task to run it, if I were king, I would say, well, it's a 5-year plan, and you got to fund the 5 years, right? And at the end of the day, then be prepared to say, you know what, we did it for 5 years and it doesn't work, or it does work. I don't know. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But be honest with yourself about that answer. I think the same thing can be said for carbon sequestration. We do carbon sequestration to a certain degree. I mean, we do CO2 floods in a lot of fields, right? Well, I think what the biggest CO2 field is in the Fold Belt in Wyoming. One of them, I think it's, and all that CO2 gets piped down to the Permian Basin, actually, because they're using it for enhanced oil recovery, right? Yeah. Which is great. I mean, what a perfect use of that. So then the question is can you capture CO2? The issue I see with carbon sequestration is it's a never-ending monitoring process, because all geoscientists, if they're honest with themselves, will tell you that the subsurface is anisotropic. And there's a lot that we don't know about of how fluid moves and why it moves. We have good ideas, and Darcy's law works, and pressure, and we understand, pressure and gradient analysis and all that stuff. But we live in a world on the surface that people own mineral rights, and then they have land, and then those go down to the, down in our world, they go down all the way to the center of the earth, right? And so all of a sudden I own a piece of property and I've got a water well that has carbon, CO2 in it. All of a sudden, what am I going to do, right? And it's, again, geoscience, we are continually learning. We have good ideas. But so that's where I see that the struggle with CO2 is going to be, and carbon sequestration. I think if we could use it in a commercial standpoint, and this is another thing with all of these, with the shale gas and shale oil, the tight oil, using that, trying to figure out a way to do enhanced oil recovery. I mean, we're recovering roughly maybe 8 to 10% of the oil in place in the Permian Basin. If you change that by 3%, the value that would be there would be insurmountable. I mean, that would benefit society as well, right? Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
Yeah, again, this interplay between, the technology, the geology, but also the economics and the politics. You brought up the monitoring issue, that there's a lot of things that all have to work together there.
And I know there's a lot more smarter people than I am that have worked on this. So I'm just giving you my pop psychology view of it as I see it. And I try to read a lot and I try to stay up on what's going on in the industry, but I still think that there are still a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've spoken about the consequences of removing baseload power from the grid. For a state like Wyoming that balances our legacy coal with more emerging or re-emerging energy industries like nuclear and wind, how do you think about energy landscapes in the future and how it could integrate all of these industries to provide reliable energy?
Yeah, I mean, we live in the fortunate 1% of the world's population. And when we walk into a room, we turn the light on and the light comes on. The heat comes on most of the time, probably at the 99% of, effective rate. And we take a lot of those things for granted. But I'm a big fan of Chris Wright, the current head of the Department of Energy, in the sense that, energy isn't about the economy. Energy is the economy. Mm. Everything runs with energy. There are a lot of different sources of energy. And then the question becomes it has to do with reliability and sustainability and things like that. I think that in the early parts of COVID and the narrative that was, we need to stop hydrocarbons, we need to get rid of coal, we need to create quote unquote renewable energy. Okay. What the voices that were saying, well, wait a minute, you've got this baseload power because we're worried about climate change. Fair enough. That's a discussion to be had. But then we're creating an energy source that's dependent upon the climate. So let's see. Now, wait. I'm just on a high level. I might want to question why we're doing that. Right? I'm not saying it's not bad. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not judging it because so all forms of energy have a place, and they're not political. They've become politicized, obviously, as we all know. But like for example, the state of Texas. I would bet, I'm trying to think, I was on the ERCOT website, which you can go see, and I think during the day, certainly between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., I'll bet 20 to 30% of the electricity generated in ERCOT is from solar. Mm. Okay, people don't think that about Texas, but that's true. Mm-hmm. There's a huge wind as well. The question becomes, at what cost? And how effective is it? You look at that baseload power and, nuclear just trucks right along at 12%, day in, day out. And, I'll show my age here, but too many of us growing up listened to Jackson Browne and, Jane Fonda and the China Syndrome movie that came out, and it was all this nuclear was going to destroy the world, right? Mm-hmm. And we were really worried about that. And so now, now what we found is that, well, wait a minute, that's not really true. Nuclear energy is a really good form of energy, and it's probably one of the most reliable forms of energy. And it is incredibly safe, right? Yeah. Incredibly safe. But it also requires a high degree of regulation, an incredible standard of safety, and also an understanding by the public of where they're going to put these things and why. Right? Because it requires a lot of water or however it's cooled. Same thing with coal. Coal is probably the most reliable source of energy and one of the most. And one of the great things about coal is that you don't have to use it all the time, and you can just pile it up next to the power plant. Oh, and then by the way, when the price of natural gas spikes, you just convert it to coal and make the power there. We talk about, I think, I was listening the other day, China, I think, is the largest generator of energy. I think I have the numbers right, but it's something like 10,000 terawatt hours per day, okay?
Wow.
5,000 of those, or roughly half, maybe it's closer to a third, I don't know, is generated by coal in China. That's more coal generation than all of the power generation in the United States combined.
That's good perspective.
Okay. So now you go to the governor of Colorado who's shutting down a coal-fired power plant and wants to install intermittent wind and solar panels. And he's going to wonder why the price goes up. And that's what has happened. I mean, it's pretty hard to debate that. And all of who controls all the critical minerals and who's the manufacturer of solar panels, it's all done, most of it's done in Xinjiang province of China under very suspect labor policies. Some would say slave labor. I've never been, so I can't say. All made with coal-powered energy. And their coal, I think Tricia Curtis will correct me on this, but I believe that she said it was about 3 cents a kilowatt hour is what the cost of their. It's hard to know exactly, but. So then the question becomes, well, wait a minute, are we going to, in the name of a cleaner environment, completely destroy the economy? All right. So there has to be some discussion about that. And I'm not saying I have the answer. I'm not saying I'm right. All I'm saying is that those are things that we ought to talk about, right, and have a dialogue. And this is what I don't know if you're familiar with the Switch Alliance. Have you heard of those guys?
I haven't.
Oh,
no.
You should hear about this. Okay, so my good friend Scott Tinker, he runs what's called the Switch Energy Alliance. And he likes to refer to himself as in the radical middle. Right? And that's like all forms of energy are good. We're going to need all forms of energy. And he and a gentleman by the name of Toby Rice, who is the CEO of EQT, which is a big gas producer in the Appalachian Basin. They're based out of Pittsburgh, I believe. They have this dream of, how do we take the 6 billion people that are living in energy poverty in the world today and lift them out of that. And what is that going to require? Because most of those people use less energy than your refrigerator uses in a day. And so then we talk about the good for society. I mean, people are dying and living short lives because they're burning dung and wood in an enclosed room to cook their meals. A very good friend of mine, Andrei Belopolsky, who's a gentleman I worked with at BP, his wife, Jillian Connors, is the head of the Clean Cooking Alliance. And I think it's UN, but I'm not sure. But they're very involved in trying to get compressed natural gas into all these places for all these people that are living effectively in poverty, to cook with gas, so they're not breathing, black soot, essentially. So, I mean, it's a broad topic. You can cover a lot of those things, but for me, these are the things I think about when I talk to my friends. And they say, "Oh, well, you're in the oil business, right?" Well, I'm like, "Well, how do you like that Patagonia sweater that you're wearing? Those Hokas look really nice on you. Where do you think those came from? Or, I really like your makeup. Are those glasses that you're wearing?
Yeah, I mean,
it's all connected. It's all connected, and I'm not trying to pass judgment on anybody, right? Absolutely not. And I'm happy to disagree with anyone on certain things. That's okay. It's better to have the conversation so that you each have, where can we find the common ground and move forward? And that's what Scott calls the radical middle, right? Yeah. Where do we find the common ground? And he's very good. He has a PBS series, if you've never seen it, the Switch Energy. It's on PBS. They have all this, and he brings people from both sides of the discussion together to learn about energy. Okay? Those are, for me, I realize that I'm in the oil and gas business, which I love, and I will always love, and never would have done anything else. But most geoscientists now, you have to understand energy. And I tell all the students that now. You need to understand because before, when I was growing up, it was everywhere, what the price of gas. I'm old enough to remember the Arab oil embargo. And, we thought, oh, gosh, oil went to $30 a barrel, which was a travesty. Well, what is it with WTI today? It's probably at 100 now, right, today. It won't stay there forever because what everybody forgets is, I remember when it was $8 a barrel. After it was 120. So it's going to change. But we feel that price at the pump because we drive cars a lot in this society. And so that's an immediate, we know that, we feel that immediately. But what's coming next is what my friends of mine at Veriton call the price at the plug. And that's what you're paying for your electricity bill.
Oh, okay.
The price of the plug, when you plug in your phone to charge it at night,
Yes.
And it's really interesting. He's encouraging everybody, and I still have to do this, is get your energy bill and try to decipher where the cost is. It's like an origami. It's really well hidden. And so these guys have talked to why have energy prices gone up? What's the cause of all this? And I think one of the observations they made is that, look, let's say you want to put a wind farm in, right? Well, the best place for that generally is not in a densely populated area, okay? So then you have to build transmission lines. And that is incredibly expensive. New transmission, right? And so this is where this is where you have to weigh the costs and the benefits of, and then, okay, so I'm going to build, let's say 10 gigawatts of power, a wind farm, but what am I going to do? It's only going to be intermittent. So then the cost is double because I have to buy something to back that up because when the wind stops blowing, I still have to have power, right?
Ideally, yes.
Well, right, exactly. Yeah. And trust me, I've been in Nigeria where everybody has a backup generator and the power goes off about every hour. Okay. Yeah. And that's very common. People they've conditioned society to become used to it. But, you look at what's going on in Cuba right now, power generation. And their whole society basically they power most of their electricity from oil, not from, coal or anything like that. I think, I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. So there's issues globally, right? And so for me, as a geoscientist, is how can we, and this is why we come back to, this is why I'm at the university, is we need to train geoscientists for the future. And they need to be prepared to look at all of these things and provide scientific answers that then we can apply commercial analysis to and decide what is best. And maybe the best thing is that, you know what? It's going to cost us more money, but our water is going to stay clean. I think everybody would do that twice on Sundays. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, but there's a lot of hyperbole and there's a lot of, people say things that are just not based in fact,
Yeah. And your point is a really important one that we need to have these conversations, that the conversations need to be had about these complicated trade-offs. It's not one size fits all and it's not simple. Like these are global supply chains, global markets, like it is a very complex system and the costs are difficult sometimes to tease out. So It's important for us to be having these conversations and to be talking to young people about them and students.
Well, my observation too is that, and these are my kids' age, but they all want to make a difference, right? Mm-hmm. They really want to do something that has an impact. And I remember there's a guy I used to follow quite often. His name is Tony Campolo. He taught at a small school, a liberal arts school in Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. But he was also very much an advocate for the poor. And he's traveled a lot. And he used to say, I travel a lot and people sit down on the airplane and they want to talk, right? And he said, I generally have two answers when they ask me what I do. He said, if I feel like having a conversation, I tell them I'm a professor at a liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. If I'm tired and I don't want to have a conversation, I tell them I'm a Baptist minister, which he was. He was a Baptist minister. Well, and anyway, the point of that whole thing, I'm not sure why I brought that up. I just a random thought. So, but having conversations with students about that, right? What is it that you want to do? And I'm coming back now. I remember his comment was, if you want to change the world, draw a circle around your own 2 feet and change what's inside the circle. That's how you'll have an impact. So anyway, that's my career advice.
Thank you, Brian. Let's talk a little bit about your current role leading the AAPG. For our listeners that are unfamiliar with the organization, can you tell us a bit about the AAPG and who it serves?
The AAPG, or the American Association of Petroleum Geologists, was started about 110 years ago in 1917 by a gentleman, I think his name Wallace Pratt was his name. And they envisioned an organization of subsurface geoscientists and basically petroleum geoscientists at the time, right? I mean, this is pre-World War I, just about World War I, just after. And so that was when coal and wood were coming out, and some people, we had found oil. Spindletop was 1901, right? So it was just 15 years post Spindletop, right? And the first big oil boom was on. And so they decided they needed to create a society that was an advocacy society, but also a regulatory body to make sure that the geoscience that was being practiced was of the highest caliber. And so AAPG has gone along, and it's grown and grown. I think in our zenith, in the 70s, we probably had 40,000 members at one time. But if you look at the membership of AAPG, it directly correlates with the price of oil. When it goes up, it goes up. When it goes down, it goes down. Presently today, I think in 2026, we have approximately 14 or 15,000 members. But it's globally. It's not just in the United States. AAPG is composed of 6 sections in North America. So the Eastern section, the Rocky Mountain section, which we're in here, the Gulf Coast section, the West Texas section, the East Coast section, and the Mid-Continent section, okay? So those cover large areas, and those were all the areas where there were major hydrocarbon basins, okay, that are kind of clubbed together. Each of those sections is its own entity, and then it is also affiliated with all of the geological societies. Like the Wyoming Geological Society is part of the Rocky Mountain section. The Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists is part of the Rocky Mountain section of AAPG. In the same way that then there are also internationally, they started the regions. So there's Canada and North America region. There is Asia Pac, Europe, the Middle East, Latin America. There's probably one more. I can't think of. I'm trying to do my geography. But anyway, so those regions all have memberships in them as well. Okay. Oh, and Africa, of course. How could I forget Africa? Yeah, which is the biggest region, actually. So then they are all organized by their own individual NOCs, national oil companies, and geological societies. Some are more active than others. Perhaps, I know you will find this hard to believe, that the Mideast region is probably the most active region, primarily because it's underwritten by Aramco and Kuwait Oil, all the NOCs that are there, right? They have a vested interest in doing this. Aramco has been an incredible sponsor of AAPG over the years, as well as KOC and ADNOC. That's in Abu Dhabi, and among others. Those are the ones I'm thinking of. So I have been a member when I joined, when I was going back to telling you about that first job that I got because I played soccer with a buddy of mine as an undergraduate. The first thing I did when I showed up is they said, well, you need to join AAPG. What's that? Well, everybody has to join. And that's what you did. It's not that way anymore. And so that's unfortunate because for me, I was able to, it immediately exposes you to all the publications. But probably the most valuable thing of AAPG is the membership networking. All right, more than anything else. And a lot of times I tell this to a lot of students is that, you're not going to find a job on Instagram or WhatsApp. You need to go talk to somebody and you need to go shake their hand, look them in the eye, and say that you're interested in going to work for them. That makes a difference. At least in our industry, it does. I mean, now today with all of these automated tracking systems and, applying for online, it's really competitive. I get that. And having been there myself, I realize that every job you have to, well, now with the advent of AI, it makes it a lot easier, but you have to customize your CV, your resume for every job you apply for, pretty much. And just about every, I'm sure here at the university and, the student placement center and the recruiting center, they'll tell you that every time too, right?
I'm sure.
It's very competitive. But I always tell my son, I said, look, if there's a place I want to go work, or I'm interested in a job opening that's there, I'm going to call somebody that I know that works there, that find out what it's like. Find out who do I need to talk to? Who is the hiring manager? Now, granted, I have a big advantage over 30 years of networking, right, and being in this industry. But the time to start is today. It's not tomorrow. And I always tell my son, and my wife rolls her eyes when she hears me say this, but I say this a lot. I say, assume the relationship. Walk into the discussion and assume the relationship. You'll be shocked at how many people will give you their time and give you their thoughts. Because I say to Joshua all the time, I'm like, you have nothing to lose because you don't have a job already, right? You're not working. So you may as well go in and find out. I mean, they can say no, right? They might say, hell no. Can I say that on this podcast?
Sure.
They might say that as well. But the point is that you never know what's going to happen 2, 3, 5 years later. People remember you for a myriad of reasons, right? I met Brad Carr, he's the reason why I'm here at the AAPG image meeting last year, because I was talking to one of his students about her poster. She was giving a poster session, and Brad happened to show up, and we started talking, and then I started sharing about, working in Wyoming and kind of some of the faculty that I knew here and being involved peripherally, really, more than anything else, but having been involved in working in the Rocky Mountains for a long time. And so I was thinking that, well, look, I need to get involved. You got to volunteer because it's a complete volunteer organization, right? And it can take a lot of time if you let it. But for me, I was at a point where, wow, my career, I want to give back because I've been so blessed having been involved in this association. So I was at the time, this is 2020, I believe, I was working in India. I was living in Delhi during COVID, which was interesting, in India. And they had said, there's, apply for, we're taking nominations for AAPG president. So I pitched my name in the hat. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. Well, I didn't get it the first year. It's fine. Okay. I don't know what I was thinking, like why I was going to win or how I was going to get the nomination because, it takes a lot of time because there's a lot of people who have spent a lot of time working within AAPG, much more so than I had. So then the next year they keep a list, so to speak. And the next year my name came up in the hat and I got nominated to be president and I was fortunate enough to win. So then the question becomes, that's like, well, what my mom used to say to me, she used to say, be careful what you pray for, because sometimes you're going to get it.
Yes.
Right. And so then I realized, oh, crap. What am I going to do? Okay. And then I started thinking about, okay, what's really important? And I said, you know what? So for my year as president, we need to engage back with the universities, back with the students. The student chapters had completely fallen off the map. A lot of geoscience schools had shrunk dramatically. Something like the University of Tulsa, which is where the AAPG headquarters is, shuttered its geology department completely, right? So why is that? What's going on? And so I started talking to a lot of people at a lot of different schools, trying to inquire. And so then for me it was, how can AAPG make a difference? Right? What can I do? So which is one of the reasons why I'm here at University of Wyoming, because I want to talk to the students. I'm learning about the School for Energy and Resources, right? I didn't even know about it until I showed up here, right?
We're glad to have you here.
I am honored to be here. No, this is great because as president now, then I can go back and start talking to all these other schools. And it was funny because I was talking to Aaron last night about this. You can't believe how many schools have somewhat similar programs, all right? And I was talking to Aaron and I was saying, maybe AAPG can connect all of you guys so you can share best practices and find ways to, because dollars and cents matter, find ways to save money, find ways to collaborate, find ways to work on really salient issues. Because again, the Rocky Mountain basins have been a testing ground for a lot of the subsurface work that goes on globally, right? So are things that are happening at the University of Wyoming with regard to carbon sequestration or whatever it might be, how could you collaborate with, say, the University of Louisiana, Louisiana State, okay, who have similar programs and similar interests, right? And you create these shared resources. That type of synergy, I think, attracts students because students want to come in and work. And one of the things for AAPG is that we have student chapters. Now, student chapters are designed to give students an opportunity to be exposed to AAPG, to come to the conventions. They are given all the access to the publications, which most of them have through Google Scholar and things like that at the universities. But nonetheless, but really I tell the students that the networking is really important. And then to create a student chapter. So you have a leadership team, you have to have a faculty sponsor. And then you want to go out and engage with all the different industries, because AAPG is not just about petroleum. We have an environmental science division. We have a minerals division. We have a division of professional affairs. Okay. And all of these things are associated with AAPG. And so now for me, people get hung up on we refer to it internally as the A and the P problem. The American and the petroleum, right? We call that the A and the P problem. But I say to them, what does CVS stand for? What does CBS stand for? What's NBC stand for? AAPG is just a brand now. Mm-hmm. It's no longer anything else because it represents so many more things. And it's about energy now. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're trying to do now, is make that transition. And sort of I guess you can call it a rebranding, so to speak. Now there's a lot of people still in AAPG that they are diehard members of AAPG, which is great. All right, we need those people because, but how do we train the geoscientists for the 21st century? These are the discussions I have with a lot of department heads now, because with the advent of artificial intelligence, machine learning, large language models, research is done differently now, and it will be. I mean, most geoscientists now can code in Python to a certain degree. Okay, I can spell Python. Okay, I'd have to take a short course to learn it. But nonetheless, the other thing I've learned about is for me in my career is stay in my lane, right? I need to stay in the lane that I think I'm good at, okay? And then I can go having a network, I'm going to go talk to somebody who, if I need somebody who can code Python, I'll just explain, this is what I need to do, and have them do it, right? Because they'll do it far faster and far better than me spending a month trying to do it myself, right? So it's about that. It's about scale. And that's where AI comes in as well. Can you leverage AI? Now, I was in Dubai in January at the International Petroleum Technology Conference. And I was there with the president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, a woman by the name of Jennifer Miskimmons, and Joe Riley, who's the president of the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, SEG, and me, AAPG. So the three presidents were there. But it was all about artificial intelligence. It was a 2-day, it was incredibly well done, as most things in the Middle East are done, and particularly in Dubai, which is just over the top, but nonetheless nice. But what I never heard was, I did not hear anybody say it is going to replace people. I didn't hear that. It's a tool, and it was very much being used as a tool. Now, will it make us more efficient? It should. If it's not, we probably shouldn't use it. Hopefully it'll help us make better decisions. But at the end of the day, and this is where I come back, and I was talking with Brad Carr about this last night, was it's still nuts and bolts fundamental science. And in the geoscience world, it's structure, it's mineralogy, it's petrology, it's igneous petrology, it's sedimentology, it's stratigraphy. Now the rub, as I'm learning, talking to the department heads of these things, are like, well, there's a fixed number of credit hours in a 4-year degree. And there are certain requirements. And then how do you make sure that you cover all the bases, in addition to preparing them to be a 21st century geologist? Because they need to take a course in Python. They need to take a course in ArcGIS, right? Tools like that. Tools, when I started, was called a light table, right? But ArcGIS is fundamentally, it's an electronic light table, is what it really is. I mean, to make it simplified. Which is great. I love ARC. I mean, if I was, I'm horrible at it, but I know how to use it, right?
I love ARC too.
Yeah, it's great, right? And so this is coming back to the public policy issue. The research that should be done and understanding for this is, so this will be my pitch to the governor. Can the School for Energy Research create an ARC model for the state of Wyoming that overlays all of the different aspects of energy, all the different aspects of infrastructure, all the different access of resource requirements? And then it allows, or should allow, then you to stack these things up and figure out what's the biggest impact, okay? Which one of these things is going to have the biggest impact? And I'm going to say that the model for this I learned when I worked for BP. And in the exploration common process, looking for hydrocarbons, we had what we called common risk segment maps. So you took each particular aspect of the petroleum system, whether it was source rock or reservoir rock distribution or thermal maturation, how deeply it was buried, what the provenance was, whether it was coming from basalt rocks or beautiful aeolian quartzites. Right? That has a difference in the diagenesis of rocks as they're buried. And you overlay all these common risk segments. And then for a particular hydrocarbon play, it's a simple stoplight, green, red, yellow, where they all line up and everything's green. That's probably where you want to make your investment. Right? Now, it's not always right, okay, but it's a way to guide that. And it would be the same thing for the state with regard to doing public policy, legislative, laws, things like that, that it would be informed by all the things that are going to be impacted by that, right? As opposed, because right now it's probably like shattered glass, right? There's 1,000 different people with all their little pieces. And so for people making laws, it's really hard to aggregate and figure out which piece, because generally sometimes what you find is the people that shout the loudest have the least impact from time to time.
Yes.
Right? And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying that, it's whoever can shout the loudest oftentimes gets the answer, but that's not always the biggest impact on what's going on in society. And so hopefully it's maybe a more applied way to take a look at some of these problems. Now, okay, so it's easier said than done. I have no idea how to start doing this, but I think it's a great idea.
It's a great idea. You're definitely speaking my language. Geospatial impact analysis is so important, and I think could be such a valuable tool. So we should actually talk more about that.
Okay.
So how important is it for University of Wyoming geology or engineering students to also understand the regulatory and land management aspects that are so unique to Wyoming's checkerboard land ownership?
Well, I think from an education standpoint, I don't know. I mean, they should have an understanding of it, okay? But it would be helpful probably to understand that the surface rights are pretty much what controls everything that happens. Mm-hmm. And there is federal land and then there's private land, yes, which is a good thing. And maybe not. Sometimes it's not a good thing, right? It depends on what your perspective, I guess. I personally think private land is a wonderful thing. And that is what's made our country great. But for students, I would say is just having an understanding of how that works and why, it'd be just having a basic fundamental understanding of how the land grant through the Union Pacific Railroad happened, okay? I mean, they built that railroad, and it changed the economy of Wyoming. It changed transportation. It changed everybody going to California. Actually, got them out to California. Mm-hmm. But what's also interesting about that is understanding how that was built. I don't know. There's a great book by John McPhee. Oh,
I love John McPhee.
It's called Rising from the Plains.
I haven't read that one.
That is an amazing book, and it's about David Love. Okay, who was the state geologist of Wyoming.
Oh.
Who was probably in the building right next door for many years.
Okay.
Anyway, about how the Eocene terrace was a gangplank that allowed them to build the railroad up over the Laramie Mountains to come into the, Rollins Basin and across west. So I would say for students, that's important. I don't know where you would take that class, because that's there's not really a lot of regulatory classes. There's not a lot of... I can see you might learn it in law school as a case study, but I don't know where that would be. So that would be an interesting...
Yeah, we do have a land administration certificate,
that's right.
An undergraduate certificate.
I met a gal last night who's doing that, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. So that actually is really valuable, and it's available both for in-person students as well as hybrid and online. So, can be available for working professionals and stuff.
Then what I would say is all subsurface geologists should take that class.
I agree.
Because you need to understand what that's about.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to close out, and I want to thank you so much for your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation, but we always like to ask a more Wyoming-specific question to close out. So you've clearly spent a lot of time in Wyoming and know Wyoming quite well. What's your favorite place that you visited in Wyoming? Or a special place?
Well, the Miracle Mile on the Green River is pretty nice if you want to go fly fishing, right?
For fly fishing.
Jackson is always, I had the opportunity to go with a gentleman by the name of Jim Lowell, who was a structural geologist, and he used to teach a course at Jackson Hole. I went to high school with his daughters, and that's how I knew them. But he took me on that field trip one time, and I was just astounded at the, seeing those the Tetons and all that is great. But I really loved, I grew to love, if you can believe I'm saying this, Rock Springs. And just the sage and the wide open spaces and just that I grew to love. And it's, I heard the joke that, it only snows once in Wyoming, and then the rest of the year the wind just blows the snow around I-80, just from place to place. But also, too, I would say not so much the favorite place, but the people that I met and the people that are from here. I think of my friend in as a matter of fact, I met a gentleman last night who knows him. He lives in Rollins. His name is Gary Sundberg, and I work with Gary. And just the salt of the earth, accepting, loved where they lived, loved the outdoors. I love driving up to 87 through Owl Canyon. I don't get to Wyoming enough anymore, being in Houston these days. But yeah, I mean, I remember in Evanston one night, my wife and I were driving, and it was Christmas Day, and we were driving to Salt Lake City. Went to stop and get gas, and this guy heard this sound coming off of the highway. And I look up, and this guy's coming down the ramp with no tire, and he's driving on the rim. Sparks flying and everything like that. He rolls into the gas station. I said, yeah, you're probably going to have to wait till tomorrow to get a tire. It was Christmas Day. But even then, you never know. Like somebody in Wyoming, if they'd have gotten there, they'd probably opened up the shop for them and done that. And that's just the way people are in this state.
There are good people in this state.
Love it. So yeah. There are a lot of my favorite places, but I think that it's always going to have a fun. I haven't spent enough time in the Northeast, in the Powder, around Newcastle and places like that, because those are beautiful places too. So anyway. Yeah.
Well, you should come to Wyoming more often. Please stop by the School of Energy Resources when you do.
I am honored. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for the conversation today.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every other Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.